On the outskirts of the small town of Greendale, there was a long-abandoned amusement park called Laughing Pines. It had been closed for over 30 years, ever since the mysterious disappearance of a dozen children. Over the years, the park had become overgrown with weeds, and its once colorful attractions had faded to eerie shades of gray. The most unsettling feature of the park was the large clown statue that stood at the entrance. The locals called it Grinning Gary, and its grotesque smile seemed to follow you no matter where you stood. One chilly October evening, a group of teenagers decided to explore the park. They had heard the rumors and dared each other to spend the night there. Among them were Jenny, Mike, Sarah, and Tom. Armed with flashlights, sleeping bags, and a healthy dose of teenage bravado, they made their way through the rusty gates, which creaked ominously as they swung open. As they walked through the park, they could feel the eyes of Grinning Gary watching them. The statue seemed almost alive in the moonlight. "It's just a statue," Mike said, trying to sound brave. But deep down, they all felt a sense of unease. They set up camp near the old carousel, its paint chipped and its horses frozen in mid-gallop. The air was thick with a musty odor, and the silence was deafening. As they settled down, they told ghost stories to pass the time. The wind howled through the trees, adding a spine-chilling soundtrack to their tales. Around midnight, Jenny heard a faint sound. It was like a distant giggle, but it was distorted, as if coming from an old, warped recording. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. The others strained their ears but heard nothing. "You're just spooking yourself," Tom said, though he couldn't hide the slight quiver in his own voice. They continued chatting, but the uneasy feeling only grew stronger. Then, Sarah noticed something peculiar. "Guys, look at the clown statue," she whispered. They turned their flashlights towards the entrance. Grinning Gary was no longer standing at the gate. The statue had moved. "Impossible," Mike muttered, his face pale. "It's just a trick of the light." But as they looked around, they saw faint clown footprints leading away from the entrance, disappearing into the darkness. Panic set in, and they decided to leave immediately. They packed up their things in a frenzy, the fear palpable among them. Just as they were about to head for the exit, a garish, high-pitched laugh echoed through the park. The sound was getting closer. They ran, hearts pounding, but the park seemed like a labyrinth, the paths twisting and turning in ways they didn't remember. Suddenly, Mike tripped and fell. When the others turned to help him, they saw it. Grinning Gary, standing just a few feet away, its painted eyes now glowing with a sinister light. The statue's smile had widened, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. Jenny screamed as the clown lunged at Mike, pulling him into the shadows. The others fled in terror, the horrifying sounds of Mike's screams echoing behind them. They didn't stop until they burst out of the park, collapsing onto the road, breathless and shaking. The authorities searched the park the next day but found no trace of Mike or the clown statue. The footprints had vanished, and the carousel stood silent once more. To this day, Laughing Pines remains abandoned, a place where few dare to tread. And those who do claim they can still hear the haunting laughter of Grinning Gary waiting for his next victims. Weeks passed since Mike's disappearance, and the group of friends were plagued by nightmares. Jenny woke up nightly, drenched in sweat, haunted by visions of Grinning Gary. The statue's grotesque smile and the sound of distorted laughter seemed to follow her everywhere. Sarah and Tom tried to move on, but the memory of that night lingered, casting a dark shadow over their lives. Determined to find answers, Jenny convinced Sarah and Tom to return to the park. They had to know what happened to Mike. Reluctantly, they agreed, driven by a mix of fear and guilt. Armed with cameras and voice recorders, they ventured back to Laughing Pines, the place that had become the epicenter of their nightmares. As they approached the entrance, Grinning Gary was there, back in its original position, its eyes seemingly following them. The friends steeled themselves and stepped into the park. The air was colder this time, and an eerie fog had settled over the area. They decided to split up, hoping to cover more ground quickly. Jenny headed towards the haunted house, Sarah to the old Ferris wheel, and Tom to the bumper car arena. The park was a maze of memories, each ride and attraction a reminder of happier times that had long since faded. Jenny entered the haunted house, the creaking floorboards echoing her every step. The once gaudy decorations were now tattered and cobweb-covered. She turned on her voice recorder, hoping to capture any sounds that might provide a clue to Mike's fate. "Mike, if you're here, please give us a sign," she whispered, her voice trembling. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and Jenny's breath became visible. She heard a faint whisper, indistinguishable but undeniably there. She followed the sound deeper into the haunted house, her heart pounding. The whispers grew louder, forming a chorus of voices that seemed to be calling her name. Meanwhile, Sarah approached the Ferris wheel. The giant structure loomed over her, casting long, twisted shadows. She turned on her camera, scanning the area for any movement. As she circled the ride, she found something chilling: fresh clown footprints in the dirt. Her heart raced as she followed the trail, leading her to the back of the park, where the shadows seemed darker and the air thicker. Tom, in the bumper car arena, felt an overwhelming sense of dread. He turned on his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the rows of cars. The light caught something shiny, a piece of fabric. As he approached, he recognized it as part of Mike's jacket. The realization hit him hard, and he struggled to keep his composure. He called out to the others, but his voice seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. Jenny, deep in the haunted house, found herself in a room filled with mirrors. The reflections twisted and warped her image, making her feel disoriented. As she tried to find her way out, she saw a figure standing behind her in the mirror. It was grinning Gary, but this time, its smile was gone. The clown's face was twisted in a grotesque grimace, its eyes filled with malice. Jenny turned around, but there was no one there. When she looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. Panicked, Jenny ran out of the haunted house, almost colliding with Sarah, who had followed the footprints to the same spot. They shared their discoveries, their fear growing. "We have to find Tom and get out of here," Jenny said, her voice shaking. As they made their way to the bumper car arena, they found Tom staring at Mike's jacket, his face pale. "We need to leave now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The trio hurried towards the exit, but the park seemed to come alive around them. The rides creaked and groaned, and distorted laughter echoed through the air. The fog thickened, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Just as they thought they were near the entrance, they found themselves back at the carousel, as if the park itself was keeping them trapped. Suddenly, the carousel lights flickered on, and the haunting melody of the ride began to play. The horses moved slowly, and atop one of them was grinning Gary, its eyes locked onto the friends. The clown's mouth opened, emitting a piercing, otherworldly scream that reverberated through the park. Jenny, Sarah, and Tom covered their ears, but the sound was unbearable. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble, and they could feel an invisible force pulling them towards the carousel. They fought against it, struggling to stay on their feet. Out of the darkness, other clowns began to appear, their faces twisted in grotesque expressions, their laughter mingling with the scream. The friends backed away, but the clowns closed in, surrounding them. Just as they felt all hope was lost, Jenny remembered the voice recorder in her pocket. Desperately, she pulled it out and played back the recording she had made in the haunted house. The whispers filled the air, and the clowns paused, as if confused. Taking advantage of the moment, the friends pushed through the circle of clowns and ran towards the exit. They burst through the gates, the sounds of the park fading behind them. As they reached the safety of the road, they turned back to see grinning Gary standing just inside the gates, its smile as menacing as ever. The authorities searched the park again, but found no evidence of the supernatural events the friends described. The park remained abandoned, a place where the past and present seemed to blur in a haze of fear. Jenny, Sarah, and Tom never spoke of that night again, but they knew the truth. Laughing Pines was a place of evil, a place where the lost children and their friend Mike still lingered, trapped by the malevolent spirit of Grinning Gary, waiting for the next unsuspecting souls to enter its cursed grounds.